It's great to have you back. If you were with us last time, you watched us declare our independence, and I told you that, there's a lot of time and thought that went into that, a lot of people looking at this from a very political lens as well. Today, what we need to do is we actually need to fight the war. And as I had kind of insinuated the last time we met, that this was a huge, huge mismatch. Really, what you're talking about is a collection of farmers uh, that really didn't have any kind of military training, really didn't have a military, so to speak, of at all, that just declared war on the most powerful nation in the world at the time. So my point is, if you were a betting person, you probably would not have picked the Americans in 1776, and most people, in fact, didn't, right? There's a few things I want you to understand when it comes to the nature of the war. Were the British more numerous than us? Did the numbers favor them? Yes. Did they have more money? No question about it. Did they have more expertise in military science? Yes, absolutely. It's yes, yes, and yes. But there's one thing that we had, actually you might say two things that we had that they maybe didn't account for. One, we had George Washington. You'll see how and why he's so important a leader here in a minute. And the second thing that we had is home turf. We were fighting this war on American soil, which means that we can fight a defensive war. We don't have to win the thing, right? All we need to do is avoid two things. One, you cannot lose Washington. If you lose Washington, George Washington, that is, the war is over. The second thing that you have to do is you have to avoid having your military entirely crushed. If you can fight another day, if you can drag the war on, even another day, you're going to infinitely increase the likelihood that you're going to get some semblance of independence. It might not be everything that you wanted, but you're going to have a bargaining chip because the British, keep in mind, they didn't really have the money for war to begin with. The whole reason that they were doing what they were doing in the first place in America was to try to dig themselves out of debt. Anyway, drag your feet, extend the longevity of the war, and you'll at least have a chance to bargain and negotiate your independence with the mother country, England. I want you to take a quick look at that image right there. It's a very famous image. It probably conjures up some pretty patriotic feelings in yourself and American life, certainly. That would be George Washington crossing the Delaware River. Um, it's often presented patriotic sort of circumstances. What you might not know is he's essentially cheating. There's a very specific day that I want you to associate that image with, and that would be December 25th, 1776. And December 25th is important for two reasons. Number one, it's winter. And you have to keep in mind that warfare was seen as a gentleman's institution. Um, People of high birth and lots of money, they led the armies. And naturally, they had all of these archaic but eloquent customs like when winter comes, we will set down our arms, and if the war is to continue, it'll continue on in the spring. It was a rich man's institution. And so, um, my point is, by attacking on December 25th, that's winter, and nobody really saw this attack coming. This is a complete blindside. And if the truth be known, you weren't really supposed to do this. This was not exactly on the up and up. The other important reason that it's December 25th, that's Christmas. You're really, really not going to be expecting an attack to come on a holiday like this, and chances are, considering it is a holiday, you're going to be doing some things that are less than conducive to warfare, feasting, dancing, drinking, not paying attention. And so both of these factors are going to be really important in George Washington's victory at what would become known as the Battle of Trenton. He crosses the Delaware after having already been thrown out of Manhattan, right? We were toasting each other, congratulating each other on our Declaration of Independence. Meanwhile, the British were sending the most powerful military in the world to pretty much kick our tails. And they did a really good job of that in the early stages of the war. They had banished George Washington to the wilderness. And the thought was they had won the war. He'd been thrown out of Manhattan. He was in the woods. They didn't have food. They didn't have supplies. They didn't even have warmth. And the British are operating on this idea that when the spring comes around, this rebellion is just going to evaporate. It's going to completely fall apart, and the Americans will have no other alternative but to negotiate their, re-entry into the empire. We won. What Washington does with this sneak attack is really preserves morale. That's important. The Battle of Trenton is a moral victory. It's got nothing to do with crushing the British military's ability to continue the fight. As a matter of fact, who we defeat at Trenton is not the British. It's their German, for lack of a better way of referring to them, it's their German allies. They were mercenary soldiers. They'd been paid to be there. They weren't even British. Now, this is a resounding victory. We chased them into the wilderness. We got a lot of their guns and ammunition. It was a victory. There's no two ways about that. But my point is, it's not like we've placed the Brits in checkmate. There's still a lot of fighting to continue. The significance of the Battle of Trenton is that it allows us to fight another day. It's a moral victory in the sense that a lot of people of the American variety are saying, well, we've got a puncher's chance here. You got to be in it to win it, and we're still in it. We're not defeated yet. And so what it does is it preserves the efforts. The British are operating thinking that, there's no way that the Americans come back in 1777. And the Battle of Trenton pretty much assures us that we'll be back in 1777. And so that's where I want to continue our conversation. The next major battle that we need to talk about would be the Battle of Saratoga in upstate New York. What the British are trying to do is they're trying to encircle George Washington at Saratoga, capture him, and crush our ability to continue on in the war. They're doing a very good job. They're winning most of the battles, and the reason being is because they have military expertise that we simply don't have, not yet anyway. Now, if you know anybody of the British variety, you know that they're obsessed with details and mythology and things like that. The guy that is counting on reinforcements to come is the commanding officer, a British officer by the name of John Burgoyne. And he meets Washington's troops at the Battle of Saratoga, and he waits for reinforcements. He waits for guys to be resupplied, and the simple matter is, the officers that's in charge of bringing those British reserves to Saratoga just never shows up. He's dotting I's and he's crossing T's. He's dragging his feet. He's doing a heck of a job on the trail, but he doesn't make it to Saratoga. And so Burgoyne has no other alternative but to surrender his army at Saratoga. Now, this is an American victory, and this time around we actually defeated the British. That was important. But even by the standards of the Battle of Saratoga, it did nothing to put the British in checkmate. We haven't crushed anybody, right? They're still going to fight another day. As a matter of fact, they did fight another day. The significance, this is important, the significance of the Battle of Saratoga has everything to do with keeping a possible alliance with the French alive. We knew very clearly that we needed another European power to back us if we were going to beat the British. And the most likely taker of this alliance would probably be the French. And the reason why? Well, they were chomping at the bit to return the favor of humiliation to the British. They had suffered themselves a humiliating defeat in the French-Indian War, and they really wanted to get behind the Americans. But keep in mind, this is a long shot, and the French knew that it was a long shot. So what the French are waiting for is some indication, any indication, that we have a fighting chance at victory. And the Battle of Saratoga does exactly that. It does demonstrate, at least in the minds of the French, that we have a chance at this, and they don't write us off. And that's a big, big deal, because as I said, we know we will need a European power to back us up if we're going to defeat the British, okay? But right now, guys, what I want to talk about is the low point in morale of the war, and that's going to come in the winter of 1777 into 1778. Valley Forge. is not a military battle. It's got nothing to do with bullets flying. What Valley Forge is the location that the American Army made their camp, rural Pennsylvania. It's the winter in rural Pennsylvania, which means that it's pretty harsh, it's cold. And you also have to take into consideration that we didn't have any provisions. We didn't have food. We didn't have warmth. We didn't have things like blankets or even boots. And we didn't have shelter, not sufficient levels of shelter. So this is obviously a low point when it comes to enthusiasm for the war. We're just trying to keep our heads above water, really. I would say that there are two things that really kind of save the day at Valley Forge and keep us together, keep us on the same page. One, that'd be George Washington. The fact of the matter is, Washington did not furlough himself. He didn't go back home to Mount Vernon, Virginia. He didn't go home to the comfort of his home and, food and things of that variety. He stayed there with his men. And that provided us, a culture of solidarity. We're all in this boat together. We're going to get through this together. So by not leaving his men, he actually more or less saved the day, or at least he did his part. The other really important individual that I need you to be mindful of here would be a guy from what would become Germany, Baron Wilhelm von Steuben. Von Steuben was not a real baron, but he was an officer in the Prussian, later on German, military. And this is one of the best militaries that Europe had to offer. On the flip side of the coin, we really didn't have a coat of arms in America. We didn't really have an American military, generally speaking. And that was problematic for a number of reasons. And the most basic of reasons is we had no idea what we were doing when we got flung into battle with the British. Example, when new troops, when fresh troops begin taking heavy fire, they have a tendency to panic. When they were ordered to retreat, they didn't retreat in an orderly fashion. They didn't fall back and reposition themselves. What they did is they threw down their weapons. They headed for the hills. It was every man for himself. So what von Steuben's going to do is use this downtime, the winter of 77 into 78. He's going to use it to train the Americans. And what he does is he dumbs it down to them that even the Americans could understand, could wrap their brains around this. He drilled them over and over and over and over again. And if you've ever had a football coach or basketball coach or teacher that has a way of inspiring through tough, rigid discipline, every once in a while throwing in an adult-flavored word, certainly that was von Steuben. If he had one talent, it was the combination of English and German curse words that he used in a really motivating style, if you will. And what this results in is a professional army. What von Steuben and Washington are able to create at Valley Forge is an army. This is important. It's an army that can go toe-to-toe with the British. It's an army that knows what it's doing and knows how to retreat, knows how to advance, knows how to fight the British. That was a huge advantage that they had, and now they no longer have it. And a lot of credit is deserved to both von Steuben and Washington for creating this army. The other thing that comes out is not only a professional army, but a very tough, gritty army. By that point, we had taken the worst that the British could offer. And not only had we taken it, we had suffered through some of the most brutal conditions of the war at Valley Forge. So it's not just a professional army. It's a battle-tested, tough-nosed, gritty army that can go toe-to-toe with the British. That was an advantage that was taken away. The other thing that comes out of Valley Forge would be a formal treaty with the French. It comes to be known as the Treaty of Alliance. It's signed in 1778. This does wonders when it comes to lifting our spirits, right? We're coming out of the low point, coming out of that low point, and our spirits are getting better and better. And by the time that the French signed on with us, this is really, really going to lift our spirits. A couple of things about the treaty, though. Number one, this is a really powerful, legitimate nation that is formally recognizing our independence. This isn't just anybody. What this is one of the most powerful nations in the world that is formally saying to anybody, including the British, we acknowledge that the colonies are no longer a part of the British Empire. They are their own independent country. That's important. What's also important is to understand the nature of this alliance. At least initially, it's not as if you've got Frenchmen and Americans standing shoulder to shoulder. Really, what the French are doing is they're fighting for their own reasons, and they're fighting to pick off some of the British Empire that was taken from them in the French Indian War. They're attacking the British in the Caribbean. They're attacking the British elsewhere throughout the British Empire. What they're really doing, what the treaty is really doing, is they're internationalizing this war. This started out as a civil war, a family conflict, and now it's an international, global affair. It got worse for the Brits. The Spanish smelled blood in the water, and the Spanish wanted Florida. And so it's not just the French, but also the Spanish that will declare war on the British. And you're starting to see where this conversation is headed. This world war will spread an already very thin British military even thinner. And ultimately, it's going to be at Yorktown that the commanding officer, Cornwallis, is going to find himself surrounded. The French are going to team up with the Americans on the ground and surround Cornwallis's troops. Most importantly of all, this is why it's such an important thing to have a major European power behind you. They had a very strong navy. And what the French Navy is able to do is cut off the American mainland from the sea. No more British troops can help to come in there and rescue Cornwallis. And the king had no other alternative but to surrender, right? Cornwallis is surrounded. America is victorious. And we pulled off this massive, massive long shot in terms of a war. We're now a free and independent country. Now, the peace talks will take place in April 1782. And if you're British, what you want to do is you want to make this lickety-split. You want to make this as quick as humanly possible. So, what they did is they sweetened the deal. Remember that land that the British, at least initially, tried to incentivize us with, the Ohio River Valley? Come join with us. We'll give you all this land after we defeat the French, and we're all going to get rich, and so on and so forth. Well, after Pontiac's rebellion, that didn't work out the way that we wanted to, and they said that that land was off limits. And to incentivize us to sign quickly and make peace with the British said, not only will we recognize your independence, we'll also throw in all those Western territories, right? We will double your landmass, and you will, in fact, be able to go out there and get rich, right? And so that's exactly what happens. The Treaty of Paris not only acknowledges that the colonies are a separate and independent country, we doubled our landmass. We gained access to states that would become known as Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi. The list goes on. Huge amount of land. As a matter of fact, we come out of the American Revolution of smelling like a rose. As a matter of fact, we're the only country that really comes out better off than when we went in. Obviously, the British are injured here, but so too are the French. The French took on a lot of debt helping us out here. As a matter of fact, it's going to cost the guy running France, Louis XVI, it's going to cost him his life. He's going to be executed in what will come to be known as the French Revolution. The Spanish have some gains, but those are very temporary gains, and ultimately they don't really win either, right? We are the only combatant in this conflict that's actually going to come out of it better off than we went into it. We're going to have our own challenges. Many of those challenges involve how we interact with those native peoples that gave the British a lot of problems when it comes to potential colonization of that part of the world. And it's also gonna prove to be problematic for the Americans as well. But for the time being, we have a United States. The Declaration of Independence ultimately becomes a political entity, and we are now the United States, a separate nation from Great Britain. And the next big challenge that we're going to have is running our country. And the light bulb's going to go off in our minds. There was a method to the British madness. there was a very specific reason as to why they were doing many of the things that they were doing. In other words, we found out that running a great big complex country like the United States is a lot easier said than done. And that's where we'll pick it up the next time I see you.